All right, whenever you all are ready.
All right. Well, welcome. This is a joint meeting of the council and the administration team for the budget. And so I will go ahead. Today is February 4th, 2021. And I'll go ahead and read our statement. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and state of emergency, this meeting is being held via live video teleconference pursuant to 2020 Senate Bill 150 and in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. And thank you all for inviting me and my team. I think that these joint budget retreats are very valuable, and I hope you do too. Vice Mayor, if I understand, I'm to go ahead and kick things off and give you all a presentation, and then we'll have questions. Is that correct?
Exactly right, Mayor. We're waiting to hear from the administration, and then we'll engage. So thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our team, and I'll ask CAO Hamilton to come to the mic. They're all, most of them, except for Melissa and maybe one other person, if y'all can just line up and introduce yourselves and tell your title, I think it'll help remind everybody, particularly new folks, who all is on our finance and budget team. Sally's getting them organized.
The chamber is muted.
I'm Wes Holbrook. I'm the Director of Revenue. Good morning.
Now y'all come on up.
Jennifer Warma, Senior Administrative Officer for Sally Hamilton.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Erin Hensley, the Commissioner of Finance.
Good morning, Ashley Simpson, Senior Administrative Officer for Commissioner Erin Hensley.
Good morning, Glenn Brown, Deputy CAO.
Morning, Dave Barbary, Department of Law.
Thank you. CAO, is that everybody in the chamber?
That's everybody in the chamber.
Okay, thank you very much. And Melissa?
Yes, Melissa.
I'm Melissa Luker, Director of Budgeting.
And Stacy, do we have anyone else in the waiting room who's on the team? Or Sally, do you know?
Elizabeth McGee is in the waiting room.
Okay, Elizabeth McGee. All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and turn this right over to Commissioner of Finance, Erin Hensley.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like we were just here. Hope everybody got a big cup of coffee this morning. We have a lot to go through. And as the mayor said, we have promises to keep and miles to go before we sleep. So as we start through the fiscal year 2020 budget process, we're going to actually start with taking a look at the fiscal year of 2020, how we ended 2020, how that brought us into 21 and what we're looking at this year before we start into next year, because all of that is really relevant and important to where we are going. Next slide. Oh, can we show the slideshow, please? Thank you so much. So we're going to start with a review of fiscal year 2020. Next slide, please. I'm sure nobody needs reminding, but we'll just go through it real quick. Our fourth quarter of fiscal year 2020 saw an unexpected decline in revenue due to the pandemic. And that really hit us in some of our top 3 revenue items. We had job losses and business closures that were reducing our payroll withholdings. I'm sure you all recall our net profits was pushed back from a due date of April to a due date of July. And even with that, we only received 2/3 of our expected net profits at that time. And in addition, car insurers gave discounts due to the lack of use or just overall folks not driving. And so we had insurance premiums that were reduced, revenue collections at the end of the year as well. In response to our reduction in revenue, we had to take some serious steps and really try and control our expenses for the end of the year. Even with all of that work, we ended the year with a deficit of $1.4 million. Fortunately for us, the federal government has stepped in. As you all know, we were the recipient of $25 million of coronavirus relief. And part of that was able to be received in, or not received, but attributed to our fiscal year of 2020. $20.77 million of our expenses were reimbursed, and that 20.77 was booked back to our fiscal year 2020. So instead of showing a deficit of $1.4 million, we actually showed a surplus of $19.28 million. From that information, we were able to have our October budget and finance meeting where we had our fund balance assignment, and we were able to take that $19.2 million, and the council was able to make the decisions on what assignments they wanted to make from that funding. Next slide, please. So just to go back and go over what those items were, $2.1 million was funded for ESR in FY21. $2.5 million was given for a small business assistance program. We committed $500,000 to a disparity study. We had $60,000 in our paramedicine support, $50,000 in our safety net initiative, $1.8 million in affordable housing trust, $1.9 million in tenant assistance, $100,000 to a juvenile court program. We committed $300,000 for the Palmer Building rehabilitation. We committed an additional $10,000 for mowing and the tree replacement program, $150,000 for neighborhood traffic management, and then the $775,000 of COVID expenses, which were primarily IT expenses for teleworking and PPE that we purchased government-wide. That left a remainder of $10,435,000 that was assigned to budget stabilization for the purposes that budget stabilization has been used in the past.
Erin, excuse me for interrupting, Commissioner. I think you said 10,000 for mowing and trees, and it was
I'm sorry,
100,000.
100,000 for mowing and trees.
Thank you.
Thank you for the correction.
No worries.
So that put $10.4 million into our budget stabilization. And we're going to track that as we go through this process, but that's where we were at the end of fiscal year 2020. Next slide, please. So just revisiting the budget stabilization reserve, I think it's important when we talk about this one to really understand how this works. If you can think of it like the extra money in your checking account, this is not a separate fund that we withdraw or deposit into. This is the cash reserves that allow the government to operate on a day-to-day basis. And it allows for shocks or unanticipated items that we're not aware of, either revenue or expenditures, to be covered in the year that we need them. It is reset by assignment from the council in the fund balance presentation every year in October. So it's not a rolling balance, and it does not have the restrictions that an ordinance or a resolution would require. So in the process of doing the FY21 budget, council and the administration committed $9.4 million of budget stabilization to balance the FY21 budget, in addition to the $10.4 million that was assigned for the uses that budget stabilization is typically used for. Next slide, please. The other reserve account that we have that was really important in the end of FY21 and again end of FY20 and again in FY21, excuse me, I'm getting tongue tied, was our economic contingency fund. Now, this one, unlike the budget stabilization, is a separate fund. It is restricted by ordinance. It's prioritized for emergencies and unanticipated situations that are unusual. And it is in a clearly delineated account. It is separate. So it does require transfers in and transfers out for action. Our goal is to have 10% of the prior year's total revenue. And what that looks like in a typical year is a monthly deposit of $50,000 that's required by ordinance. That was suspended during the coronavirus period of time. With all of the activity in economic contingency, we came into fiscal year of 2020 with a balance of $36 million. Council voted to put $6.4 million into the economic contingency in anticipation of what was going to happen in FY21. That left the balance at the end of the year and the balance we currently hold at $42 million. Next slide, please. So that kind of sets the stage for how we started this fiscal year. So right now, you all just, if you recall, we just had our December presentation of financials for the first 6 months of FY21. Initially, back when we were doing the budget in March, we had no idea what the trajectory of the pandemic was going to be. So we did our due diligence. We worked with Mike Clark at the University of Kentucky, and we made our conservative estimations of where we thought we could get to in revenues. The result of that was a 7.1% decrease in revenue from our FY20 adopted budget. With having that difference in revenue, we had to shore up our budget by using one-time funds to balance. Next slide, please. The council approved the use of $36 million of one-time funds for the balancing of FY21. We've gone back and researched based on our legal restrictions and kind of the structures of the accounts. I've listed those items from least restricted to most restricted. Our insurance fund is our least restricted, and our actuary recommended that we pull down that balance. So to date, that is the only budget stabilization one-time funds that have been used to this point. And that was a $4 million transfer that occurred in November of this year. The next item that is available for use for balancing is budget stabilization. The third is our tenant relocation fund. That is set aside. It is a separate fund. It would require a transfer, but it has not been accessed in quite some time. So we used that as a balancing item when we were preparing this year's budget. Fourth is our economic contingency fund due to its restrictive nature. And last would be the parks fund, because that was actually a loan that we were going to have to take out that required repayment. So that would have been the most restricted funding that would be taken. Next page, please. So where are we based on our updated projections? The impact of the pandemic on revenues has turned out to be far less than what we anticipated. If you all will recall back to our December budget and finance meeting, we are doing much better in our revenue categories than we expected to be at this time. While we did see the fourth quarter of fiscal year 20 and the first quarter of 21 lower in revenues, our second quarter of 21 has rebounded and come back much stronger than we anticipated. In addition to that, with the low interest rates, we were able to refinance our bonds. And so that has saved us, or will have saved us when we get to the end of realizing that, almost $1 million in debt savings by the end of this year. Additionally, again, if you all recall back to our December presentation for budget and finance, we have several expense categories that are showing savings, a large portion of which is based on our personnel vacancies in our police and corrections. And that is also contributing to some other savings that organically occur from not having the individuals driving cars that are in fuel and repairs and maintenance and some of those items. Next page, please. So what does that look like? Since we are doing better as of December, what does that look like if we're projecting out? So what we have done is take our rolling 6 months where we actually are, and then if we applied the remaining budget, where would that put us at the end of the year? The first column you can see in the table is our FY21 budget without one-time funds. So you can see that $36 million down there at the bottom. Based on our projections, where we've been through December plus our budget applied for the remainder of the year, we are somewhat projecting that our revenues come in about $13 million better than we anticipated. And if we keep on track with our expenses will come in $24 million less than what we've anticipated. Now, I want to speak to that for just a minute. This is based on our budget. And one of the things that we know going into this year is that we have trended our revenues and expenses month over month. We showed that chart earlier last week. And we are entering into the period of time where the government's expenses tend to exceed their revenues. And so the next 6 months that we're going into, with the exception of the net profits return month and showing in April, end of April and May, we typically have higher expenses than revenue, or that gap is much smaller. So this is with our projection, we're showing where we are today, but we know that there's going to be some movement here. And again, just to bring this back, we have applied one-time funds of $4 million at this point, which is helping this balance. So if you take the revenue increase and the expense decrease that is projected, that roughly gets us around to our balance of one-time funds we expected to use. We are a long way. We have a long way to go till the end of the year, but it's giving us the opportunity to take a look at these items, track them very carefully, and see if that provides opportunities for next year. We obviously will not know the full answer of that until we get to the end of the year. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that has happened throughout the course of fiscal year 21 is our budget stabilization, which previously held $10.4 million that was not essentially restricted, has now grown. We have received the remaining funds from our original $25 million coronavirus relief, and that has been added to budget stabilization. In addition to that, this slide only shows the 25 million, but one thing to keep in mind is in December, we were notified that we would get an additional $2 million of coronavirus relief reimbursement. That is going through the process right now of budget amendment and will be dropped into budget stabilization. That'll push our budget stabilization that's essentially unrestricted up just over $16 million. Next slide, please. So what does all this mean going into FY22? Next slide, please. We are, if you will bear with me for a minute, we are on the far left-hand side of this chart. We are just now starting to look at preparation of the budget, and we are working on our revenue expectations for next year. Fortunately, we have the opportunity for everyone to get together and discuss priorities today, and that will help us shape and mold the budget that is coming. In addition to the fact that our budget hearings are also coming, so we will get the real requests from our divisions of what they need anticipated for next year. We will then provide a draft. The budget will be submitted to the council with the mayor's budget address in April. There will be a variety of meetings and public hearings, and we will eventually adopt a budget in June. So we still have a long way to go, but this is a really great start in working towards that. Next step, or next slide, please. So what are we looking at? While we may be ending FY21 stronger than what we anticipated, we are still expecting that next year, our expenses are going to outpace our revenues. While our revenues are doing better than we expected, they're still not growing at a level that will either meet or exceed our expenses. So what does that mean? That means, again, that we will need to access one-time funds or try and come up with other cost-saving measures to balance that revenue versus expense difference. We're going to need to fill the gap again. Next slide, please. So for our initial projections in revenue, there's a couple of items that we want to keep in mind. Our major revenue sources are recovering from the pandemic impacts, but overall employment is still down. So we're not really sure where our payroll withholdings are going to end up. Any aggressive increase to those may be premature. Workforce changes from the pandemic are yet to be fully realized. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces with this, and we're still not sure where we're going to end up. One of the other things that we're keeping in mind is the relocation of workers due to increased flexibility. So we're also not sure how that's going to impact our revenues, and we're trying to determine, based on what we've seen in the last several months, if there are any trends that we can apply. There are some expected increases that we know are going to occur. We know that our pension contribution is proposed to go ahead and move forward, and we're going to be contributing more last year or next year than we did last year. In addition, we have some public safety step increases that will be coming. We're also aware that there's a rate case pending with Kentucky Utilities, and our utilities will most likely go up. We are aware of an insurance increase, so we will have to make sure we fund that. And then there were several items that were removed from previous budgets due to not having regular operations based on COVID. So we are hopeful that we will be able to reinstate some of those programs, which obviously will have a budgetary impact. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for our debt service? FY21 debt service is $46.1 million. That puts our current debt ratio above our 12%. We also need to keep in mind that we have some large capital items that are pressing for the city at this time. And the interest rates are very favorable to bonding at this point in time. So we're going to have to take all of those items into account when determining how much we will need to bond for next year. Next slide, please. This is just a year-over-year depiction of where we have typically been as far as bonding. We have been a little bit lower the last couple of years, but again, as we discussed, there are going to be some pressing capital items that we're going to need to pay attention to in the coming years. Next slide, please. And then this is a chart that you all should be familiar with. I think it's been presented for some time. The blue section at the bottom is our existing pension bonds, so you can kind of see how that looks going forward. The orange section is the additional debt service, and then the gray would be projected. So just to give you an idea of where we are and where we're going, or where we may be going, we wanted to provide this picture for you just to have some basis of information. Next slide, please. So at this point of time, in time, that is where we are financially, and I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Gordon to discuss with you her items of focus and her priorities.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hensley. And Councilmember Sally is sending this presentation out to you. I apologize. I didn't realize you didn't have it. It's hard to write all this down. So first I want to talk, and these are just some of my thoughts about some of the areas that we're looking at to fund. And first I wanted to talk about economic development, specifically workforce development, which, you know, the pandemic, what it has shown us is the importance of a strong economy. And so our entry-level employees have felt the negative impact of COVID. And so we are going to continue to fund workforce development. And we will continue to fund the jobs fund allocation, which will underpin our commitment to recruitment and expansion of high-paying jobs here. And then as far as environmental, I am going to put in the budget funding for the Energy Improvement Fund, EIF program. The presentation, which I think you received last month, showed how important this is as we work to lower our carbon footprint in government. And we will also include litter abatement money, mowing money. You will remember that in the current budget, we tried to keep that a little lower, but we'll be funding that. And then general services, we have some important items there. I will recruit to fill the General Services Commissioner position, which, as you know, this position has been temporarily filled in an acting capacity for almost 2 years. And excuse me, I'm getting a message here about updating something. And so we believe we are ready to fill that position in the budget. And there are various failing roofs under building improvements, which we need to fix so that we can stop the water infiltration and erosion that's leading us to bigger and more expensive items to repair. And then as far as non-public safety vehicle replacements, streets and roads vehicles are old, some of them are failing. And so I am looking at replacing 5 dump trucks in their fleet. And you will understand that this enables LFUCG to be responsive during all kinds of weather events. Some of their vehicles are over 16 years old. Speaking about infrastructure, we know we will include paving in our bond, and we will also include the paving that we've been doing every year for several years to pave parts of Man of War. That's our responsibility, and we have to keep up with it. It's expensive, and so we try to do a little bit each year. And then also traffic and pedestrian improvements. As you know, those are certainly important. Let's talk just for a second about neighborhoods. And all of you know, I know well, having been a district council member and an at-large, how important it is for our neighborhoods to stay strong and healthy. So to that end, and in response to the Commission on Racial Justice and Equality report, I'm going to propose funding a new Department of Housing Advocacy in the fiscal year 22. And council members, you're going to hear details of that on February 9th at the General Government and Social Services Committee meeting. We're pretty excited about it. A couple things to note about it. It will include our affordable housing program and homelessness prevention and intervention. We're sort of doing some shifting to align all of our housing needs in that new department. And I intend to fund affordable housing and homelessness prevention at the amounts required by ordinance. And I'm also going to bring for your consideration in that department, that new department, a pilot program to help low-income homeowners abate housing violations cited by code enforcement. For the first time, LFUCG will apportion local funds to assist some of our vulnerable and really most vulnerable homeowners to avoid these fines and to help them avoid potential foreclosure. Let's move to the next slide, to parks. I think parks is up next. Next slide, please. Well, let me talk about parks, and maybe our slide will pop up here. I'm not sure who's running the slides, but anyway, when you get a chance, can you put the parks slide up? Starts with parks, please. Page 22.
Yes, ma'am. The computer's locked up. We're working on it.
Okay, well, let me talk then. We can work through it. So one of the things that we discovered big time is during the pandemic, how important our parks really are to people and our natural areas. And when businesses shut down and we had a lot of shutdown in our economy, what happened is that our parks use skyrocketed. And through September alone, Google had Lexington up 61% in parks compared to the previous year. And let me give you a couple of details. Raven Run is up 13%. Attendance there was nearly 65,000 people so far. McConnell Springs is up 12%. Attendance is over 47,000 people. And golf rounds are up 15.3% fiscal year to date. So people really did enjoy getting outdoors. And so we are committed to safe, fun, equitable parks where people can get outside. And my parks allocation will include various playground replacements in accordance with the park's master plan replacement cycle. However, my goal is to meet with each of you in the next couple of weeks to find out what your main priority is in parks in your district. And I think that's important to understand. And so we also, of course, continue our facilities improvements. We continually have those every year in our ADA improvements citywide. Next up, public safety. As you know, a lot of our positive variance in personnel in the current fiscal year has come from vacancies in public safety. And so I'm going to make it a priority in the budget to fund 2 police recruit classes and 1 fire recruit class with the goal of getting our public safety divisions close to their authorized strength. We know that both of those divisions are down in strength right now. Police have 127 vehicles in use, each with over 100,000 miles. And I'm going to provide funding to replace many of those vehicles in the bond package. Fire has given me a list of their vehicle priorities. And so one of the things that will be high on that list, as well as apparatus replacements, is a focus on our EC units, our ambulances in the budget. Purchase of development rights. To my knowledge, this is the only program in government other than the EPA consent decree that has an end to it. Nothing else ends. And so the goal of PDR is 50,000 acres under protection for farmland. And LFUCG currently is 20,000 acres from its goal of protecting these land-based businesses. And I see this as a similar program to our tax incentives for businesses inside the urban service boundary. One big difference is this program garners federal matching funds. So we're gaining a lot of money from the federal government. They have had record numbers of applications. The program is thriving and on track. And so there will be a small amount in the budget for that. And then social services, I'm committed to funding our various social services partner agencies through ESR. We've seen that the work they've done in the pandemic can't really be overstated. And so I am interested in your thoughts about that. I know you have looked at that in committee and are continuing to do so. So one final page, I think you've got it there. In my budget, there will not be any new tax built in, and there will not be any employee layoffs proposed. We are taking a thorough review of our prior year operating expenses because what we believe is that our operating expenses have shown us that in some places we can operate with less money. and we are being very efficient that way. We'll have a continued freeze on various vacant positions as we do right now. We are proposing, you will remember that the graph that Commissioner Hensley showed showing our economic contingency fund and how it has gone up with the infusions that we've made. So we're going to propose suspending the economic contingency contributions for next year. There will be some use of one-time funds, and then we don't know exactly what our additional federal stimulus money will be. We know that the federal government is discussing it, and they have said there will be money for local governments. We have no idea what that will look like in the final analysis when it gets done. So next slide, please. So these are what we see as our next steps. We want to know your priorities, and we'll start our budget hearings very quickly, finalize our revenue base, and draft our proposed budget. So that's kind of it's really a quick overview of the whole thing, but I think it's a good point if Vice Mayor and Councilmember Bledsoe, if you would like to have questions right now. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll just weigh in quickly and thank you, Mayor, and the entire administration for bringing this forward. But I will yield the floor to either Councilmember Bledsoe, if she has a comment, or any other council members for questions and comments. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bledsoe.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for your presentation. I think it's very helpful just to have a thorough review of last year's stuff. Sometimes it's a little confusing to keep track of where the money is coming in, going out. And I won't speak for council, but I think if we had known we weren't using that 20 million contingency, we may not have put 6.4 back in it. We could have used that in other places. So we have a healthy now, $42 million in that account, and 16 the other ones. Pretty amazing considering where we are in a pandemic. So I appreciate your sharing your thoughts and your framework budget that we talked about, and I look forward to working with you and this administration moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, if I can just briefly jump back in. I've raised a question with the commissioner about the economic contingency fund and the question of a reimbursement and whether that was appropriate. So that's being, as I understand it, that's being considered at the moment. So we can talk about that more.
I do want to be sure everybody understands, we do not know for sure we won't have to dip into it. I think you heard Commissioner Hensley say we're entering a time in our budget where our expenses exceed our revenues. So I want to be sure everybody understands that we don't know for sure that we won't have to use it. We're hopeful based on revenues, but we don't know for sure.
Well, I think that the concern I had was that it was clearly meant to be a reimbursement. That money has not yet been spent, and putting it back into the economic contingency fund restricts its use in a way that I think we had not intended. From what you've presented, it looks like there will be money taken out of the economic stabilization contingency fund, and the 6.4 should go back in. But I think the question of when and how and et cetera, that needs to be resolved. So thank you.
I totally understand that. Thank you. And everybody, the other thing is, this is such a different time for budgeting. We have been, it's been month to month. And of course, what we know now, we wish we had known last year, but we didn't. And I attribute the really great management to our finance and budget team. They have been fantastic at managing this day to day and month to month. And many cities are not coming out of this with a AA bond rating intact like we are. So, okay, I do not have a list of folks. I see 2 hands, and I don't know which order you came in. So Councilmember Fred Brown and then Councilmember Lamb.
Councilmember Lamb was first, and then.
Okay, Councilmember Lamb. I don't have the list. So Councilmember Lamb, why don't you go?
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Fred Brown. I appreciate that very much. And thank you for this presentation. I just have a couple of questions. I'm still, as I was trying to write ferociously while this presentation was going on until we got a copy of it. I do appreciate getting a PDF copy so I could pull it up on my cell phone because I don't have 2 laptops in front of me. But I would like to ask Ms. Hensley a question. Commissioner Hensley, excuse me. It's on page 17 and she speaks, it's about the FY22 budget initial projections. And she's talking about some expenses must increase. And she was speaking about the insurance. And I would just like further explanation of exactly what insurance, and just so we're all clear about, are we talking about the self-insurance? What are we talking about here?
So our initial indications law works with our risk insurance, which includes our workers' compensation and those items. Our initial indications from them is that that is going to go up. We have a meeting next week regarding health insurance. So we're just starting to get information coming in for anticipation of different insurance, both self-insured, but different insurance increases next year. The $1 million that is discussed at this moment is about our risk insurance.
Okay, I really appreciate that information. And then one other question, and I'm trying to go back and reference the proper pages for context for everybody. It's page 13, when you spoke about the funding assignments and you talked about there's an additional $2 million that is coming in now. I missed if you said where that's going, that allocation is going.
It will
once you
also,
process it.
Yes, ma'am. It will also go to budget stabilization based on the resolution that was adopted. But that is in the budget amendment process. I think it may have second reading at the next meeting, but it will be finalized here shortly.
All right. I appreciate for those 2 clarifications. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Fred Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Good presentation, really. I think this year you've given us a little bit more heads up on some things, so I appreciate that. One thing, now that we're, I don't know, getting adjusted to what funds we have and what monies we have, I would think that we would want to go ahead and try to get those funds that we've taken out by vote, I guess, back to a normal amounts. In other words, one is that we have the insurance fund of $4 million. It needs to be put back if we've got the monies there to do it. And I know this all has to do with some of it has to do with cash flow, actual cash dollars. But we made decisions there on all of that budget stabilization money, economic contingency money, insurance, money from parks. Why can't we get all of those back to what they were before we started all of this pandemic scare? And then go forward. What it is it's just confusing to me, and I know budgeting, but it's confusing to me that we've still got those things hanging out there when we're not using them. In other words, but we made a decision on to use them, but we're not using them, and so we could start from square one again when we do the 22 budget to see how much we need to use. That's yeah.
Yeah, let me say one quick thing and then I'll ask Commissioner Hensley. Remember, we're only halfway through our budget. So we've already had to use the insurance. That we couldn't stay whole without it. So now we're going down, remember that arrow with the priority. We do not know how much of those we will need to get us through June 30th. And I'll let commissioners say more about it.
So just to speak to the insurance fund for a moment, like some of our other funds, that particular one has earned or has grown a fund balance over a course of a long period of time. That is not something that our auditors would like to have retained. So it was their recommendation as well that we pull down excess fund balance and move that back over to the general fund. So that one is actually one that has been recommended to do. And the fund does not necessarily want it back or need it back at this point in time, because we are funding it sufficiently for the needs that we have based on our actuarial projections at this point in time.
Okay. Well, that's good news, because this is something new that I wasn't aware of, that
right.
we had adequate insurance fund balance, and but rightfully so, we need to put it back into our regular budget then. But anyway, that was kind of my thoughts there on trying to get back to square one, so we could, as council members, could understand where we're going when we go into the 22 budget. And then I realized that, but the projections show that the next 6 months, we're still going to have adequate funds. Now, the question there, I guess, ask the commissioner, how is the actual cash flow there to pay everything and the revenue that's coming in? You know, that's the other side of the coin. You can look at the fund balances and look at all this items, but how much cash do we need, or where is our cash at now?
So just to go back for a moment and be clear about these one-time funds, we have not drawn one-time funds that we have not needed to this point. We will continue, if we have enough cash flow, we will not have to draw funds from, say, the economic contingency. We will not have to do that transfer, because we have sufficient cash in our budget stabilization to get through the ups and downs. So that is providing our cash flow at this point in time. And that is working, that has been working for the last 6 months, and we're hoping it'll continue to work through the remainder of the year. Only time will tell on that. So,
and keep things straight there. That economic contingency fund is in a savings account somewhere. It's all intact, right?
It is a distinctly separate fund. That is,
and it's intact right now. We haven't used any of it. Okay. All right. That explains it a little bit more. I wanted to get that out. One other question that I wanted to raise. There was no discussion there, and I'm still of the mindset that we're spending a lot of money on maintenance of our building, and I saw nothing in there, and I would hope that we haven't quit thinking about a new building. And I realize we're looking at what we've gone through here, but still yet we have already determined that we need a new city building, and that new city building will pay for itself within 4 to 5 years as far as breaking even on what we're doing now. And I don't want to lose sight of that, and I want to make sure that I point that out, that I feel like the new city building is a savings and not a white elephant type of thing. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown, we haven't lost sight of it. And actually, I get asked about it fairly regularly by the public. We just, when the revenues were on a roller coaster, we couldn't see our way forward to put that in the budget at all. We are, you remember, we're fixing some roofs and maintaining what we have. So we haven't lost sight of it. Now, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your presentation. Couple questions. I want to go back to ESR. You said you're going to fund that. Are we going to go back to what we usually funded, the 1% of the budget, or do you have a number out there that you're looking at? Now, I know the 2.1 million is what the council proposed in their budget, but that did not come up to what we were doing the last 3 or 4 years. Are we trying to get back to that number for the ESR?
We understand how important it is. We have not talked about a number. we are just now getting into our budget hearings, and we'll have a number later.
And going back to the bonds, do you have an idea, when I look at that chart and we're still over the 10%, and you're looking, talking, in your conversation, you said we're gonna bond probably blacktop again and cars. Are you gonna do compatible to what you did last year's bond? Or are you all looking to go a little bit higher this year?
We don't know yet. Our CAO Hamilton has received all the capital requests in order of priority from the divisions. And so, it's all a fine balance. Right now, the interest rates are so low that bonding, as you heard Commissioner Hensley say, bonding is in a kind of a favorable position. And we know we need vehicles, we know we need paving. And of course, that chart that showed the bar graph of the last 2 years, we did try to keep our bonding very low to help our situation there. So we're still kind of working on that number. It could be a little higher, but we don't have it yet.
Okay, and going back to the continuance, from the $16 million that we've gone up from $9 to $16 million, I thought a lot of that money that we're supposed to set aside for our retirement to pay, to keep up with the phases that we're gonna have to go through in the next 4 or 5 years with the governor, or whatever, with the state to catch up. Do we have any idea how much is this year supposed to be, or when are we gonna get this? Because I don't want anybody to think that $16 million is money that we can spend on toys out there, when I really thought it was basically with the keeping the catch up with our retirement system. Now, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. It was set up to pay for the pension bumps. That was the reason the council set it up, and Commissioner Hensley can speak to the amount that we are going to owe next year for the pension bump.
So actually, Councilmember Lamb asked the exact same question in our budget and finance meeting this last time, and we provided an email response that shows the rate, but in dollars, it's looking about $2 million just to start out for next year. So that we're anticipating at least an increase of $2 million.
Okay, well, then my question to you is the year after that. I just want my new council members to understand that I think it goes from 2 to 6 to 9, and then eventually it's locked in at a number like 10, 12 million. We're just basically trying to catch up. And then once we get to that 12 or whatever, we're locked in for good to keep pace. Am I correct on that?
So budget stabilization that you all will assign at the end of every year, when we determine our fund balance at the end of every year, council makes a very important decision of what to assign to budget stabilization, not only for that pension item that you're discussing, Councilmember Maloney, but for any other items that we're not expecting, that we didn't budget for, to kind of be that safety net and that safeguard. So what we will try to do is bring that schedule so that you all know at the end of every year with fund balance assignment, how much we think we will need, particularly for that item, so that you can make assignments as appropriate if that's something that you'd like to do. Does that answer your question?
So what I'm trying to understand is, to make it clarify, that the $16 million, which is great. If I were correct, and I know Melissa's there, and I think Susan Lamb will be able to answer that. I think by the time we catch up, it's going to be additional $12 million every year. Am I wrong on that? To keep on top of what we're paying now for the $33 to $34 million we pay every year into the pension. By the time we get there, it's going to be 50 million or close to it. I don't know what the real numbers are, but am I wrong on that, or is that correct?
I think I'll let commissioners speak in a second. I think you're on the general correct path.
Okay.
Each year it will raise us more in our pension payment, and we are responsible for a higher amount. But the bump is not determined for the next 5 years necessarily. We find out 1 year at a time, correct, Commissioner? on what the next year's bump will be.
I believe that to be true, but I certainly can go back and research it and provide an outlook if that is something that is available to us to provide.
Melissa, do you know?
Yes, each year the board, the KRS board sets the rates. There was the bill that passed through the state legislature that the rate will not go up more than 12% a year for, I believe, 4 years. And then after that, I think it will be revisited. But they set that rate in December each year, KRS board does.
Thank you, Director Luker.
And that 12% is on the total amount. So just so our new colleagues understand, it's
Are you
Director Luker, is that, I mean, that's correct, right?
It's added.
It's a 12%. Yes, it's a 12% increase onto what the prior year was each year.
Okay.
On the
Thanks.
rate.
Thanks.
Mhm. It's sobering, isn't it? Councilmember Reynolds.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, both to Commissioner and the Mayor. I think it was really helpful, and I liked the visuals. When you are talking about PDR, just so it's clear to me, you were talking about trying to put money in the budget to acquire more land. Was that what you said? Was that to get to a certain goal, or was that what you wanted to increase? How many acres you wanted to increase it?
Okay, that's a great question. The goal is not my goal. The goal was set back in 2000 when the council approved the Purchase of Development Rights program. And so the stated goal for the Purchase of Development Rights program is 50,000 acres under protection. And as you know, the city isn't buying land. We're not acquiring land. The farms are agreeing, because they want to continue to be farms, to sell their development rights. And so the goal of the program set in 2000 was 50,000 acres. That's the end goal.
And you want to put money into the budget to reach that goal, not?
Yes.
And you said there were 20,000 more to reach that goal. Is that right?
And it took, let's see, this is 2022, so it's taken 22 years to acquire a little more than 30,000 acres. It's a slow process. And of course, we have not been able in the last 2 years to put money in like every mayor did before because of our financial situation. It's always bonded. And then I believe they have, it's either 5 or 7, I'm not looking at my notes, 7 farms that are already in the queue and already have federal matching funds. So,
do you know how that would be to when you talk, do you have a number yet for how much that would be?
Not yet.
All right, thank you very much.
It just historically, for those who don't know, in 2000, every mayor through, there may have been 1 or 2 years up to now, put $2 million a year into the bond to Mayor Miller, Mayor Isaac, Mayor Newberry. And, you know, I wasn't able to do that because of our financial situation. So I'm hoping to put some in the bond this year and to continue that program so we can get to the goal.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. Who else has a question? And you know, Vice Mayor, just 1 second. It's interesting talking about PDR. I have meant to ask how many tax dollars we have in the tax incentives for businesses inside the urban service boundary. And I intend to look at that because it's kind of a balancing act, the land-based businesses and then the sort of building-based businesses inside the boundary. It will be interesting to see. Vice Mayor Kay.
Thank you, Mayor. So at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, I had suggested that it might be useful, if possible, for the commissioner to put together a page, maybe it's 2 pages, but what I find very difficult to hold in my head is money that's come in, money that's gone out, money that was reimbursed for 20 as opposed to fiscal year 21. So I guess I'll ask the question, would it be possible to put together a little chart that shows essentially, because of the complication of both the delay in the payroll and the net profits tax, and because of the money coming and going under COVID, to show a little kind of in one place what's come in, what's come out, where we'll have, so for example, the ESR funding, I thought that was in the 21 budget.
Yes,
but now it shows that it's being reimbursed with COVID money. So I don't, and there's a bunch of other things just like that I have trouble kind of understanding the real flow. And it may just be me, but something like that would be helpful.
I'll let commissioners speak to it. It is a year like none other for budgets. So, you're not alone in trying to follow the money. Commissioner?
So in answer to your question, Vice Mayor, our attempt at that was to provide the slide on page 5 and the slide on page 13, because it's really hard to remember what happened at what point in time. And so it shows the difference from FY20 to FY21 of that coronavirus relief money. If we're asking for a slide, or if you're asking for information regarding what was funded in the FY21 budget, that is something that I can absolutely provide. I was trying to address your question with slide 5 and 13. But if that didn't get to what you were asking, I can provide something else for sure.
I'm just pulling it up on my computer.
It's the one with a lot of pictures.
Yeah, I've got it. I guess my question, maybe it's just a very specific question.